Hey there, I'm Brad Miller, and today with Jason Medford, and we are walking a spiritual path. And when you're walking the path, sometimes it's bright and sunshiny. I went hiking this couple days ago, and it was nice and sunny. The weather was beautiful out and everything. And sometimes that translates into this spiritual path that we take. Sometimes everything is great. We get to see, you know, signs and we have growth and we learn special things about ourselves and stuff, and it's a wonderful time. But sometimes the path isn't so clear and so bright and shiny. Um and and so today was kind of drawn to talk about maybe some of these dark bits um about yourself, and I'm sure we'll talk about how that applies to your kind of spiritual journey and all. um But so a couple weeks ago, I was um kind of got an urge to pick up a an Oracle deck. I think we've talked a little bit about something this before. I know I have animal medicine cards and things like that that I use. Basically that's kind of been my primary, that's kind of been my thing. I don't really have anything else, but a couple weeks ago, I kind of got this urge. I was kind of drawn to a particular Oracle deck set that I went ahead and picked up. Um, and so today, before this recording today, I kind of got an urge to draw one of these cards to bring into discussion today. And so I'll start by, so the deck is, for those of you who are interested, and if you're on YouTube, you can see it a lot clearer here. It is the Shaman's Dream Oracle. Okay, that's the deck that I was drawn to. And the card that I pulled for today is this one. And for those again you on YouTube, you can see it, but it is Root Girl, the Disowned Self. So, Jason, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think it's interesting as you were talking about, there's so many parallels and lessons for us to learn in
Mhm.
uh, just everything that's around us. And I know, like you talked about, I think so much of the time we want it to be bright, sunny, shiny, clear,
Mhm.
when we go out on a hike, right? Which was the example that you gave. And as you were talking about that, I remembered a time that I was in the Sierra Mountains in California, and it was 20 degrees with 30-mile-an-hour winds, and it was overcast, and it was kind of drizzly, and I was cold.
Good times, yeah.
Good times, right? I was cold, and I think, one of the things, maybe from this too is for us all to kind of change our perception a little bit of, we want things to be bright and sunny and warm,
Mhm.
but that's not always how the path is. Sometimes
Right.
it's raining, the wind is blowing, it's overcast, you're cold, right? but
Mhm.
but both of those ends of the spectrum are part of the path. Sometimes it's going to be
Mhm.
sunny, sometimes it's going to be rainy and cold. And what's interesting is, I think a lot of times, we obviously learn lessons from both.
Mhm.
But sometimes some of the greatest lessons and growth comes from those times of adversity, right? And
Mhm.
so we shouldn't shun it. We shouldn't complain about it when it gets to that point, because often those, when it's the darkest, is when the light comes. And again, even thinking about nature, the
Mhm.
darkest time of the day is right before the sunrise.
Mhm.
And
Coldest part of the day
so,
as well. Yep.
and usually the coldest part of the day as well. And so, we shouldn't, complain about them or not want to have those experiences, because a lot of times, right after going through that, is a tremendous amount of growth, clarity, other things like that that end up coming through. And so to maybe in one way start changing our opinions about those times and actually welcome them. And I
Mhm.
think, I'm guessing where we might go in this a little bit too is the disowned self, right?
Mhm.
And you can talk a little bit more about that, what that card kind of means, but how, we're so quick to label and put good and bad on
Mhm.
different things. And, again, that's part of the journey is to stop doing that, right? And
Mhm.
stop necessarily seeing things as good or bad, but seeing them as they are and learning from everything that we come in contact with.
Yeah, yeah, there is no good, there is no bad. It's all just kind of the perception. It's the judgments that we're making, kind of based
Mhm,
on these glasses that we've got on. The expression, they're wearing rose-colored glasses, but in this case, it's the glasses that color the way we see the world around us, based on our indoctrinations, our beliefs, those around us, our experiences that we've had. All those things really color what we see and how we interpret the things going around with us. Because in nature, nothing, good, bad. I know we've talked about the sequoia trees,
mhm,
how they
mhm,
need fire to release the seeds to be able to grow. We may say, well, there's a fire, the tree's on fire, like this is a bad thing, but that's just merely your perception. That's your judgment that it's a bad thing.
mhm.
It just is, because without that you wouldn't be able to have the new tree growth, right? So you know
Well, and even when you think about, like different weather patterns, and again, this is just me, my personal opinion, and it's a story that I'm changing. But it's like, sunshine, great with that. Rain, well, that's okay too, right? Snow, well, that's okay. Cold, I can handle the cold. I prefer to be warm, but wind is the one that always would get to me, especially if it was cold and windy,
Mhm.
right? But as I have, again, learned more about wind and air from a spiritual standpoint,
Mhm.
and realize the benefits of it. I mean, it usually is blowing things away, right? It's clearing the air, it's clearing the space, and it just felt like, well, like I just can't get away from the wind, right? Well, you can't get away from spirit either, right? So I mean, there's kind of a lesson
Mhm.
there as well, and maybe of embracing it more and understanding, what it is. And so when the wind comes through like that, now I am envisioning a clearing and some other things that are happening
Mhm.
instead of me just complaining about it. And
Mhm.
it's that way with, so many of these things now is starting to just change our perception and change, what we've been taught to believe that probably is not true, right? And how can we see things from a different way? How can we, turn it a little bit, view it from a different perspective? Because everything that we're experiencing is for our benefit, even little things like the weather, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and I think that is a good lead in actually to this card that I drew here, the disowned self. What does that mean, the disowned self? Well, according to the book that came with the cards, it's talking about the parts of you that you see as flawed. So it's maybe it's where you've got some guilt or shame regarding something in your life, something about you, some place maybe where you had a kind of personal wound. Um, and the idea is that this girl is kind of the personification of that wound. And it's something that we don't want to think about. We kind of look away, when we see it. But the card is suggesting that rather than look away, rather than try to push it aside and try to bury it and forget about it, that we actually bring it to light, that we accept it, that we actually love it, and we use that as we talked about, kind of as a growth opportunity, um, to allow yourself to be transformed. This is the idea of kind of one of the dark aspects of yourself. And it's one of the greatest sources that you can have of light. When you've got this darkness, it's an opportunity to change, um, to do better by yourself.
Well, I think it's funny because light and darkness, right? So we kind of come back to this theme again too, right? And I was listening to something today actually, that was talking about how, in total absence of light, life cannot exist, right? We need light to exist. We need light for life. And we're taught to kind of be afraid of the dark in a way. I mean, most little kids are afraid of the dark. I mean, I remember this one instance. I was probably 6 or 7,
Mhm.
and I had this art easel in my room, right? So it was a room I was sharing with my brother, and that we had this art easel in our room, and there must have been some piece of clothing or something that was hanging on that easel. And from my perspective in the bed, I thought a bear was in the room, right? And so here I am, this little kid, and I'm lying there awake in the dark, and what I'm perceiving in the darkness is a bear, and it scares me, right?
Mhm.
And so, I think I got up, turned on the light, and saw what it actually was, and then I was like,
Mhm.
"Oh, not a big deal, right? It's
Mhm.
not
Not a
really a
bear,
bear,
right?
it's something else." And so, how much of the time are we that way where we're kind of looking into the darkness or looking into the darkness of ourselves? And we've talked about
Mhm.
this before, right? Like facing your fears, turning into the darkness. But when we shine a little bit of light on it, we realize that the darkness is not as scary as we thought it was.
Mhm.
In fact, usually it's not at all what we're perceiving or thinking that it actually is.
Mhm.
And so, if we can shine a little bit of light in that, like you said, if we can, instead of looking away in shame, if we can shine some light on it and maybe look at things a little bit different, even if it's ourselves, right?
Mhm.
Can we change that perception and take those things that are in our shadow side, those things that are in our darkness, if you will, and can we actually use them, love them, have compassion for them, and then find a
Mhm.
way to use it for our benefit, right? Because I know for myself, there's certain parts of me, there's certain beings within myself that are kind of dark. And they're pretty powerful. And a lot of times, we look at it, it's like, well, no, I don't want to have anything to do with that part of me. I don't want that part of me to show up.
Mhm.
And a lot of times I don't want that part of me to show up, because when it does, I say things or do things that I don't necessarily from my higher self want to do. But when I tame that beast within me, and I give it a job to do, and I have it show up when I need to have it show up, right now,
Mhm.
I'm not ignoring it, I'm not neglecting it, I'm not ashamed of it, but I'm allowing its strength, right, to do what it needs to do to help me from my higher self. I just have to learn how to control it, how to give it the right kind of jobs, right? And that's the way we're all made up of lots of different people. It's crowded in there.
The voices, it's just
In a way, the
conversation.
voices, everything else, right? And again, I mean, this goes, past lives, other, when you talk about it from a psychology perspective, a lot of times they're referred to as things like archetypes, right? That are these different parts of us that show up. And certain times those parts need to show up,
Mhm.
right? Because if they don't, then we get annihilated. right? There's a part of me that is very fierce and takes no prisoners and literally cuts off the heads of its enemies. Now, those of you that know me, you know that I'm not a violent person. I'm a very loving and kind person. At least Brad's smiling. So I hope he's right. But there's a part of me, you cross me, you're dead, kind of a thing. Now, that's not a part of me that I want to have show up all the time, but
In
sometimes
traffic, that's a bad part of you to
that's a
have.
bad thing in traffic.
Yeah.
But in certain things, right, that part of me, that fierce warrior needs to show up. And so to be ashamed of it, to discount its power, is not really serving myself or serving it because it's a part of me,
Mhm.
as well. I just have to know how to control it, because when my wrath comes out, it can be very damaging, very powerful. And so I have to, constantly be aware of that and only use that when it's absolutely necessary at the right times.
Mhm. Well, I'll take this a slightly different direction from that, and the idea of self-acceptance. The idea that we have these in there, and yes, they have their purposes in there, um, but is accepting the fact that we have these different components, these different aspects, archetypes, whatever you want to call them, inside of us. You may say, I've got a bloodthirsty killer inside me, but I don't want anybody else to know that. Like, and you could be ashamed of it. You could, try to push it down and be like, I don't ever want that part of me to come out and whatever. But like you said, there are reasons why you have it. There are benefits that you can gain from it. It can help you in different ways. And so part of it is, I think, self is accepting that fact, is and not just how can I use it, but loving the fact that you have those parts of you, that you are such a we'll call it multidimensional person with all these different aspects of it. Um, some that we want others to see, and some that maybe we kind of keep to ourselves, and that maybe only the closest people to us get to see, or that only come out on special occasions. But those are all part of who we are. And if we start to feel shame, we talked about the levels of emotion
Mhm.
and the frequencies, and how shame is one of the very lowest frequency emotions you can feel. So you don't want to, don't really want to feel shame about yourself, something about yourself. You want to love yourself. If you aren't going to love yourself, who is? Right? I mean, you kind of have to be your biggest advocate. And part of that is accepting, hey, you know what? I've got these flaws. I've got these parts of me that maybe I don't like so much, maybe not my favorite aspects of myself, but they're there. And not only do I have to deal with them, but I love myself more because of it. It's kind of like, I know we talked about kind of partners, an episode or two ago. But it's the idea of, how do you know if you love somebody? And it's not that you love them in spite of their flaws. It's because you love them because of their flaws.
Mhm.
And it's kind of a very similar concept here, I think, is that you love yourself because of the multifaceted aspects of yourself. I'm not, I like myself except for this and this and this. No, I love myself because of all these aspects and parts of myself.
Yeah, no, sometimes that can be, loving yourself can be one of the most challenging things to do, right? Because
Hmm.
we're usually harder on ourselves than other
Definitely.
people would be on us. I mean, that's one of the reasons why when I was a corporate executive, I had my people that worked on my team do their own evaluations, right? Because I knew that they would be much harder on themselves than I ever would be, and then I could kind of raise them up a little bit from there. Um, but it's kind of that way, with us too, and the fact that a lot of times that fear and shame that comes up of, oh my gosh, I don't want people to know that about me. But once they do know that about you, right? Yes, there will be those people who will judge you that don't really love you anyway. But the people who really do unconditionally love you, and if you unconditionally love yourself, they're going to love you even more
Mm-hmm.
because of that thing, whatever it is that you might consider to be, a flaw or a failure. And then again, it's just about, controlling it or using it in a way that is for the highest and best good,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you don't want to be hurting people. You don't want to do harm to people, right? And so obviously maybe if there's those parts of your life, right? And again, I'm working on this because there's a certain part of me that when people say things to me or do things to me, I don't even have to say anything, but I just blast people energetically that I did not realize that I was doing. And so I have to be very conscious of that and kind of regulate that because especially people who are very sensitive to energy. I mean, it's worse than if I reached out and punched somebody in the face energetically. And so, again, but that raw power can be good when used in appropriate ways. Obviously, hurting people is not a good way of doing it, right? But those
Mm-hmm.
same things, right? The things maybe like the compulsion that some people feel, right? And it's like, we judge it and say, well, you shouldn't be like that. You shouldn't be all consuming when something comes up. But at the same point, the people who have that are able to really get things done and often create beautiful things. I mean, a lot of times artists are kind of that way, right? Where they have this compulsion, they have this painting in their head and they have to put it on the canvas and they
Mm-hmm.
don't do anything. They don't eat, sleep, or do anything for like 2 days straight until the painting is done and then it's done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times we might look at that and say, "Oh, there's something wrong with that behavior," right? Because our society tells us what's right and what's wrong. It's like, what do you mean you're not sleeping for 2 days and you're ignoring everybody else in your life and you're not eating, you're drinking? That's unhealthy for you, right? And so we place labels and things on that, but it's also can be a great strength
Mm-hmm.
as well
Yeah.
if we just look at it a little bit differently.
Yeah. It's all based on your perspective. It's all based on
Mhm.
the lens that you look at um, things going on in your life. So, well, that's kind of where I wanted to go with that. Do you have anything else? Are there things that you wanted to kind of hit on this one?
No, I think it's when you first held up the card and I saw the disowned self, I kind of was like, what does that mean? But at the same point, I think um, it's kind of some of those things that we talked about, but it's also in realizing that we die every day and we wake up. So there may be two certain parts of us from a history perspective, right, of who we were yesterday that we have to kind of disown and realize that the past no longer exists. That's not who I am anymore. And so I can let go of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? I don't have to cling to that anymore. I
Mm-hmm.
can disown it. I can let it go as well. And I think there's certain things too like that where terms like shamanic death and some other things like that come up often in this space, but it's those dying a little bit every day so that we can live that much more. And it's that whole idea of destruction leads to creation, and creation has to be destroyed to create again. And so, when I think of the disowned self as well, I think of that aspect as well. I mean, I know we've talked about like three or four different different ways
Hmm.
to look at this, but I kind of see that as part of the path as well, is, not hanging on to some of those things that we usually place some self-importance on,
Hmm.
and that it's okay to disown or leave behind some of those things as well.
Yeah. Well, and just even the fact that you can change just because you decided you wanted to be you were something one day, the next day you could be completely different.
Mhm.
You know, just because you did something yesterday doesn't mean that you have to do the same thing today.
Mhm.
You had a turkey sandwich yesterday. That doesn't mean you need to have turkey sandwich again today. Maybe you have roast beef, right? I mean, maybe you have, maybe you have a salad. Just because you've done something one day does not mean that's who you are. It does not define who you are as a person, because you have choice and can choose something different.
Yeah. Well, it just reminds me of an old Seinfeld episode where one day George decided that he was just going to do things the opposite of the way he normally would do it. So like they were at the restaurant and he orders a different sandwich and than he normally does. And of course he overhears there's this lady in the restaurant that orders the same thing and he goes over to her and he wouldn't normally ask her out on a date, but he does and she accepts. And all these different things where he changed his life for a week or so of doing kind of the opposite of what he would normally do, to great success in a way too. And so, sometimes again, that's maybe part of it too, is just kind of um, changing things up a little bit and realizing that we don't have to. We can make a different choice today. We can make the same choice that we made yesterday if we want to again. But tomorrow we can do something else. And every time we lay down and go to sleep, we can, if we want to, kind of die and let that old part of us go and start every day fresh and new if we want to. If we don't, if we want to keep carrying forward the baggage from previous days or years or whatever, uh, it just becomes very heavy to do that
Mhm.
if you're carrying around all that extra baggage.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to I think to visualize a lot of the crap that we've got that we bring with us. Um, and again, go back to that card, the different things about ourselves that we don't like, the circumstances that we're in, that we've created ourselves, um, from the past, but there's nothing to say that you can't make different choices tomorrow and make things completely different
Well, and I
for
think,
yourself.
it's kind of the thing that kind of came to me is, with all these different things, can we love it or can we let it go?
Mm.
Right? Because I think in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, it's like, do we want to embrace and shine the light on it and love it? Or do we just want to let some things go? Because I think it's a balance of both things. Sometimes we
Mhm.
should love it and lean into it, and sometimes we should just let it go. And for each person, that's going to be different, for different situations. But yeah, can you love it or can you let it go?
And that's the beauty of something like this is that there are many different ways that you can interpret it, that you can see it, a lot of lessons, and it's all kind of personal to each individual person.
Mhm.
What you hear is, and the lesson you take from it is going to be different than somebody else.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's all what you need
Hmm.
at the time.
Hmm. Exactly. All right. So lots to think about this
Mm-hmm.
week. For you to go back and again, like you said, Brad pulled the card, Root Girl, the Disowned Self. We talked a little bit about what it kind of means to us or some of the different ways that you can think about it. But ultimately, the important thing is now that, everybody listening, you just sit with it.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean for you? Because you listen to this episode. So there's something in this episode for you. What is it? Lean into it or let it go, whatever that might be. and just
Yeah.
decide what that is and move on.
That's right. Cool. Everybody have a great week, and we will catch you on the next episode.
All right. See
See
you,
ya.
everybody.